Hey, Pat Koenig here, technical agronomist in Northeast Nebraska. Just wanted to give a quick video agronomy on demand update after the storms that rolled through eastern Nebraska caused some pretty significant damage due to hail and wind and the combination. So I know Austin's going to talk a little bit about hail damage on soybeans. Just wanted to give a quick walkthrough on corn and show you what I'm seeing out here in the field. So what to look for when evaluating some of this hail damage. The field I'm in right now was at V4 when the storm rolled through, so I had 4 colored leaves. We don't see the growing point move above ground until V6 on corn. At V6, it's about right at the soil surface, maybe slightly below. So we have this plant here. This plant got beat up pretty good. Now I would say this one, we did see little to no effect from the hail damage. We can get some tie up in the whorl here. You probably won't see it on this one, but sometimes that dead tissue can get tied up. Now, like I said, this plant probably is going to be fine. As we move down the row though, we have some that completely sheared off, just above the soil surface. Now again, these should be okay depending on what we see for regrowth, which is why we want to wait 4 or 5 days and just see what regrows. The ones I worry about at this stage are plants like this that didn't quite break off, have a lot of tissue that's still hanging on. Those are ones that I would flag and just see how they come back as we move forward here. So here's a plant I dug up. I cut it off right at the soil surface. You can see that our growing point's actually down here, and the soil surface is about a 1/2 inch above where the growing point at the growth stage we're at in this field. So again, V4 corn, growing points at least a 1/2 inch below the soil surface here. So any plants like this, as long as we don't get tie up on this new growth coming out of the whorl, we should be okay. These plants that are stripped up, these leaves hanging here still do have some photosynthetic capacity, so yield damage should be minimal on these plants. But again, wait that 4 to 5 days, see what's out there, and then make a determination after that.
Hey guys, it's Austin Merce, technical agronomist with Channel here in Southeast Nebraska. Just like Pat did on the corn side, I wanted to walk through a few examples on the soybean side, what I'm seeing out in fields for damage, varying in severity. Obviously guys, I know it's not always what everybody wants to hear, but a few days will definitely help tell the story of what beans are going to make it and what beans aren't. Don't get me wrong, there's those fields or places out in the field where the beans, you can definitely see they're broke off below any growth point and aren't going to make it. But then we've got those that are probably look pretty good, still have some leaves on them and are going to make it. But it seems like every field I've been in, there's the kind of mid-range that maybe a third or half the field are kind of questionable how many are actually going to make it and what aren't. So with that, I'll jump into a few examples of what I'm finding of that varying degree of injury. All right, here's kind of a quick example of some beans that were pretty small during that hail event. You can see a little bit of different stages here, a lot of unifoliate, maybe just first trifoliate, some that are just cotyledon, some of these that were struggling a little bit coming out of the ground. For sure, one thing that first thing to kind of keep in mind is looking at these beans that are at that cotyledon stage, or looking down at the cotyledon. You can see down here, this plant lost its unifoliate, anything that was above it, if there was a trifoliate there. The cotyledons are still intact, so still going to be a viable plant here. You can see right there at the tip of my finger that axillary bud is going to shoot out some new growth, be all right. Another example of one that's for sure going to be okay. Still got new growth there at the top. You can see that unifoliate leaf and first trifoliate trying to open up there. All right, here are a few examples of some close-ups of what I'm finding out here, varying degrees of injury. This first one you can see is completely broke off below any cotyledon, below any growth point. That plant is not going to be a viable plant, should not be counted in your stands. The next one you can see here, everything is pretty well stripped off that plant, but you can still see the growth points there, kind of at the tip of my finger, some growth points up there at the branches of that unifoliate. But this plant is going to have a tough time making it, just because there is nothing as far as leaf tissue to feed that plant. Probably need to give that plant some time to see if it does come back at all.
This last plant here, you can see does have leaf tissue that's left up there. Cotyledon, one's completely gone, the other one mostly gone, but where it has leaf up there should be a viable plant when you're counting. This final one, you can still see has some growth points, still viable, some leaf tissue, but as you further evaluate that, you can see this plant is kinked off, is broke, and bruised from the hail that we received. That plant is going to have a very tough time getting any nutrients, any water up and down that plant. Pretty well going to be done. One thing to keep in mind definitely as we evaluate these plants, want to obviously look to see if there's any leaf tissue, anything, but also if there's any damage to that stem. Even if that plant would come back, probably going to have a tough time standing through anything the rest of the year. Once it gets some weight on it, more than likely those plants are going to lodge and fall over and not be a viable plant for you come harvest. All right, with a wrap up here, guys, just like I said at the beginning, corn or beans, it's definitely good to give those fields some time to regrow. It gives you a lot better idea of what plants are going to be viable plants that are going to have regrowth to them, which ones might be wrapped up on the corn side, and on the beans, which ones are going to have some regrowth. Otherwise, for sure, there are good resources out there. The University of Nebraska does have some really good resources, maybe a little more in depth than what we're doing here on these quick videos. But for sure, if there's places we can help you guys as TAs, please reach out to us and we'll get you resources where we can and try to get around and help you look at some of these fields best we can. Thank you very much. Have a good one.